Welcome to the Working Genius podcast, where we discuss anything and everything related to the 6 types of working genius and how it impacts your work and your life. I'm Pat Lencioni, your host today, joined by my trusty co-hosts, Cody Thompson. Good afternoon, Cody.
Good afternoon, Pat.
And we got Tracy Noble in the other room. How you doing, Tracy?
Doing great.
And Matt Lencioni, our engineer. Matt nod. Yep. Hello, Matt. Good. Matt might join us for part of this today. All right. What's our topic today, Cody?
Well, we finally teed this thing all the way through. So the title today is All the Pairings, finally.
That's right. We're just going to go through all of them.
Yeah.
All 15 pairings, because we were rolling it out slowly and then getting distracted. And so we finally sat down and said, if we had to pull up and shoot right now, what would be the final descriptors? But before we do that, we want to make sure people understand that these descriptions, these pairings, are not as important as the 6 types and as the direct, true meaning of what this is. This is a productivity tool. This is a way to understand ourselves and what we're great at. But we don't want, and Matt, did we have a few people wrote in and helped us understand this, right?
Yeah, so we've received feedback around this from a number of our certified facilitators and a number of our listeners, just about the idea that the pairings, we don't want them to drag the focus away from it being a productivity tool. The point of the pairings is to help people resonate with their types easier, to make it easier to say, oh, that's me, and to just provide another level of depth to the model. Then this is my W speaking, but we don't want the pairings to be distracting from the core of the model, which is the 6 types themselves.
Got it. Right. Very good. Who are the people that gave us some feedback and helped us out there?
Adam Peterson is one of our facilitators. We had a great conversation with a bunch of them a couple weeks ago about the point of the pairings and what they're used for. And then just got some feedback recently from Randy, one of our podcast listeners, some thoughtful comments about why we're developing the pairings and what they're going to be used for and everything. So we appreciate that kind of feedback from listeners and facilitators.
And another listener, Chris, insisted that we provide the opposite, like the negative part of each one, or the potentially negative, because that really helped him confirm his type, because he's so we're going to talk about the downside of each one. But
the
again,
evil genius?
Yes. Not to weaponize it or to, like you said, distract, but it can help people confirm their type.
Yeah, okay. It's clarifying more than anything.
Right. Now, we've already done, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 6 of these. So we're going to go fairly quickly through those. But let's just start at the top. WI, okay? Wonder and invention. Now, we call this person, and this has been the truth since the beginning, the creative dreamer. My wife is a creative dreamer. Many of my best friends are creative dreamers. And let's talk a little bit about why we picked that term.
Almost all the WIs I've mentioned this term to, this idea that they're the creative dreamer, that seems to strike a chord in them, because many of them I'll even say are like, I'll say, hey, do you have like a journal of a bunch of ideas you're never going to get to in your life? And oh boy, that is totally me. Is I walk around the world and respond to my environment and constantly come up with ideas about what we could do. And so not always implement the ideas necessarily, but they are walking around with a fount full of ideas for, I know a creative dreamer who has like 3 or 4 different great names for food trucks, just like, and so they constantly are doing this, whatever environment they're in, they're coming up with new creative ideas.
And Chris Stefanik, a great friend of mine, he was the one who really resonated with the downside, and his wife did too, because I said sometimes creative dreamers can create chaos. So he's like, I'm the chaos maker, because they'll say, I have an idea. And then people are like, that's a great idea. And they start to work on it, and they'll go, wait a second, I have a different idea. Yeah. And they're like, what are you talking about? And they come up with ideas. They throw them against the wall. Sometimes they're practical. Sometimes they're not. They're great generators of dreams and ideas, not necessarily refining them to make them implementable. Make sense?
And they're leaning into their genius. They walk around wondering about things, and then they come up with new things. It's great fun for them. And so it's totally well-intentioned.
Yeah. My wife says, she goes, what am I supposed to do with because she, takes care of our kids in the house. And she's moving out of that because our kids are getting old. She goes, what can a WI do? And I said, oh, tons of stuff, but it doesn't really lend itself to laundry and driving kids to practice and getting groceries. She's doing a job that's got a lot of ET in it. That's a whole different conversation. And I said, plenty of uses for WIs. They're geniuses. They're brilliant, but it depends what you're working on. Okay.
You guys need to resurrect your game you created, Pat. You and Laura.
Yes. Yeah. We created a new game, and she wrote a musical, and
yes.
and she's always coming up with these amazing ideas. Well, actually, some of them aren't amazing, and she'll say, "I need your discernment to decide which of these ideas is workable and which needs more work." So you're right, we do. Okay, let's move down to the WD. The WD is the contemplative counselor. Okay, wonder and discernment. Matt, you're a WD. You like that term?
Yep.
The contemplative counselor. What do you like about that?
I think it just speaks to both the kind of in my head thoughtfulness, like contemplative. I think that fits, and then it speaks to both the
discernment side. Counselor is
He's wondering, what should I say? That's great. Yeah, the WDs we've talked to love this term. Even if they're not formally a counselor, they're like a source of wisdom for people.
Matt is our resident counselor here at the table group.
Yeah.
He's so thoughtful. It's incredible.
He's 23, and yet he's like going, "Hey, have you thought about this? Maybe you should try this."
Yep.
Even when you don't ask him. No, I'm just kidding.
No, you have to ask.
Actually,
yeah.
If you don't ask, you're not
him.
getting anything from me.
That's right. Now, the thing about WDs, as we just witnessed with Matt, they can be a little hesitant and nuanced. And that's that W, they're in their head and they're like, is this really the right thing to say? I want to make sure that I've really thought this through. So as much wisdom as they have to give, sometimes they can be a little hesitant and overly nuanced because they want to make sure it's just right.
Right. Nuanced in a way that might prevent them from landing on one specific thing without any wiggle room to change it. Like I kind of need a little bit of I need a little bit of space and margin to nuance this even more if I decide to.
Exactly. Exactly. So the contemplative counselor is our WD. WG, the least frequent type that we've encountered. The smallest number of people have been wonderers, galvanizers. So asking questions and then galvanizing people. There's a real tension there in this stuff. And we call this the philosophical motivator. And you can see just the name itself seems like, what? The philosophical motivator. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, and I think we have done a good job of like saying, hey, here's the nuance or the dark side of it. What's great about all these types, and we talked about the creativity of the WI and the nuance, the counselor piece of that is just like helps us land where we need to go and ask really great questions. The WG can explore a lot of different possibilities and get energy and momentum around a lot of things in their life. So there's this excitement, this passion. We even had a like philosophical, I think, was in the conversation for one of these words because they like thinking big picture thoughts, and then the energy they get from exploring those with others and galvanizing conversations around them. I think the idea of the philosophical motivator, that's a great type on a team. You can get a lot, and they're rare.
The downside of is that they can be a little confusing because they're both saying, let's do it. And then they're like, but maybe not, because they have that W. And like I was talking about a mutual friend we all have. He's the kind of guy that would say, Pat, like imagine being like, there's that guy over there. Take on that bully. Go get in a fight with him. And as you're walking out there, okay, he'd go, I don't know, but he's pretty big. He might kick your ass. Maybe you shouldn't. And it's like, wait a second. So sometimes it can feel like, but you just said two opposite things. And they're like, I know, And so the WGs we know, and there's not that many relative to the other types, can be that way, but they're really thoughtful and they really like to encourage action. Make sense?
Makes sense.
All right, we move on to the WE, the Wanderer Enabler. We call this the idealistic supporter. The idealistic supporter really, they think about things, and if there's a cause they believe in, they're in, and they're going to take care of everybody and do whatever people ask them to do around that cause. I mean, think about that. The idealistic supporter. How wonderful is that?
And the idea that the W, the way that shows up, we always talk about that as being people who are obsessed with unrealized potential or always asking questions like, can we do something better? And so when an idea is presented, with maybe a possible, like a better, we're going to do more for the world. We're going to do more for these people. We're going to serve these people. And then the E kicks in and they're like, I'm in, I want to help with that. So that it sort of pairs well with this in walking around, observing their environment and articulating what might be possible, and then responding to the call to go do that. I think that's a really great way to talk about WEs.
Yeah, we have a WE in our office, Tim, and he's just like, he's going to do anything he can because he believes in what we're doing, and you can see that. But a person like that, if they didn't believe in it, would not be as excited about helping. Now, one thing about WEs is they can be easily overrun because they're double responsive.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to, why do I always forget that word? What's the opposite of responsive?
Disruptive.
Yeah.
They're not disruptive. He's going to be like, I want to take care of others and I want to think about this stuff. So sometimes it's going to be tough for them to prevent people from overrunning them because they are so responsive.
Yep.
That's the WE. Now, last W is the WT. This is the wanderer and tenacity person, tenacious person. This is at opposite ends of the 6 types. And we call them the careful implementer. Careful implementer. They like to get stuff done, but they're also pretty careful, pretty cautious. And this is a wonderful thing because and we've worked with a number of these. I was with a team that had 2 of these the other day. And so there's all kinds of good things here. Really deep thinker, but they live at 50,000 feet. Like, why? Could it be better? And then at 5 feet, let's just do it. And as you can imagine, that can cause them to feel very conflicted and torn. And everyone I've met who's a WT finds themselves really pulled between the clouds and the pavement.
Yeah, I think that the WT is interesting. You mentioned, we've talked about altitude on this, and they do bounce between asking questions and we've talked about W sort of being a nuanced approach to life, like they constantly are asking and tweaking. And then this pull into tenacity that's like, we need to get something done around this. And so it can look like bursts of energy and then like hovering above it to assess, and then bursts of energy and going back to the W to say, is this the right thing? And I actually have a WT in my family, and the decision making and action process can be sometimes a little angsty or anxiety inducing because they're constantly wanting to make progress and so nuanced about the direction. They tend to live in that space.
And it's interesting because their 2 geniuses are rarely used simultaneously. And at the beginning of the process, we want their W. And then at the end, when we're implementing, we need their T, but they might be tempted to go back to W. And we had the head of finance for an organization recently who's a WT, and they were like, we need your W. We really do, but early. And then when we get to that place of implementation, let's just totally focus on what we need to get done. So that's a real challenge, but it's a kind of a beautiful challenge. But if we didn't call it out, we'd be doing them a disservice.
That's right.
Okay, let's move into the I's. The ID is the first one that we're going to talk about, right? Because we already talked about the WI. The ID is the discriminating ideator. We took a long time to figure this out. This is what I am, by the way. Invention and discernment, the discriminating ideator. So lots of new ideas, but they really do like vetting those ideas internally. They have a thought process that goes, I have an idea. Is it going to work? I have an idea. Is it going to work? So by the time they come out with their ideas, they're usually fairly fleshed out. Now, having said that, no inventor can ever completely discern their own ideas. Tracy, you're my book editor, and I need you because when I'm in the depth of invention and writing, I need a second person to give me feedback.
That's right. Yeah, Pat, and it's worth noting here as well that we actually changed the name or the label or the pairing originally because we had already explored this on a previous podcast.
Yes.
So this is our newest thinking around the ID.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's why you put a check mark and the word new on my whiteboard.
Right.
Yes, that's true.
Well, and what I would say about that is generally a person that has invention and discernment versus someone who might have have invention and a different genius as their second. The way you might think of that is the rough draft is generally pretty good. Like the first pass is a little bit more refined than some of the other people who might not have discernment as a second genius. So you do a little bit of that, but like you said, it's still a rough draft. We still need to invite people into that process. It can be kind of hard for you to discern your own ideas.
Mhm.
But the discriminating part is like, yeah, there's not a lot of really bad rough drafts that get through that filter.
That's
Right.
right, Pat. You make my job as your editor really easy.
Well, I appreciate that, Tracy, and I understand what you mean. Here's the funny thing about an ID, though. The first draft is pretty close to being really good, but
Mhm.
I am terrible at taking it the rest of the way.
Yes.
And people are like, that's a great first draft. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think it's going to get much better unless I have some help, because that's about what I got. And so we're good at front loading the best stuff,
Sure.
but without somebody that's got some more D and a little T in them to push it forward, and G and other things, it doesn't get a lot
That's
better.
Yeah, I can help polish it up a little bit. That's what
Yeah.
I do for you.
Or a lot of it.
And one thing I'll say, we're about halfway through, but I think it's worth noting that all of these are just talking about the genius of these pairings, but it also has some nuance based on what your competencies are and what your frustrations would be. So these are like
Mhm.
generally right if we were to just in a vacuum articulate what is someone who's got these two geniuses particularly gifted at. And then like if there might be an ID that has a little more tenacity than you, Pat, and they might be a little bit better
I
at
hope
getting it along the way, So
Right.
it's just take it with a little bit of nuance around this, because this is just a helpful way of understanding what are the two letters at the top,
Yeah, I think Matt is probably glad to hear us say that, because Matt is
Mhm.
really concerned about making sure the purity of the model is applied. An ID with a lot of T coming next is going to be very different than me that has T somewhere down the road.
Mhm.
Probably
Yeah.
there's some in there if we looked hard enough, but not a lot. Okay, but the bad thing about an ID, I know I was going to skip right through that, is that because we vet things, we can be pretty darn overly insistent that we figured it out. And so it's not easy to counter us or disagree with us, because the first 2 or 3 objections we've already thought through. So then we can go, no, I know what I'm talking about here, which can be hard. So we can be overly insistent and difficult to disagree with.
Mhm.
Mhm.
All righty. Let's go to the IG, the inventor galvanizer. We call this the evangelizing innovator. So they're an innovator, but man, do they sell. They're excited, and they are genuinely excited, and they love to get other people excited. So they go, invent, let's go get people to start acting on this. And
Yep.
these people are born salespeople, motivators, exciting. You think about those old Westerns. I've been watching a lot of Westerns lately. There's that guy that's selling the bicycle in the, like, look at this new contraption. You don't need a horse. It doesn't poop. You don't need to feed it. It's a bicycle. And they go from town to town trying to sell the bicycle. You think that's an IG. I figured out how to make this thing work, and now I want everybody here to have one,
Yeah.
And IGs love getting people excited.
Mhm.
Well, and here's an interesting nuance. So we talked about the WI, the wonder inventor, who's the creative dreamer. That person, like I mentioned at the beginning, they'd have a list of ideas in their journal that no one's ever heard of. There's not a lot of inventor galvanizers where you haven't heard about their ideas. They're not in the journal. They're out in the world, and there's already people that are like, are we going to do this thing? So a lot of these, the evangelizing piece of this is really key. The evangelizing is tied to the word galvanizing, right? That's what they do. They immediately start to get momentum and energy rallied around ideas that are not in a journal. They just came up with that morning, and you might hear about it that afternoon.
Mhm.
Right. Now, the downside of the IG might be that sometimes they can be hasty. They can be a little too quick. I was in a room with a leader the other day who's an IG, and he goes, I need somebody else's discernment, because I'll jump right from my invention to galvanizing, and a little discernment will go a long way to making sure I'm galvanizing the right thing. So they can be a little hasty. The other thing is, and this is uncanny to me how true it is, they can seem over the top. And even I've misjudged so many IGs in my life as being inauthentic, and always come around after a little while going, oh my gosh, they're really like this. So the first time they share an idea or something like that, I think, okay, this can't be real. It's like, oh no, they're really like this.
Mhm.
And I love the IGs I know, but usually at first I'm a little put off by their over eagerness to sell me something. Then I realize, oh no, they're really sincere.
Yeah.
So that's just something.
Yeah.
And the IGs I've shared that with said, oh yeah, that's totally true. That's how people see me sometimes. So
Before we go to the next one, I think it's worth noting that this is another one that we mentioned on the last pairings episode, but we've changed since then. So
Mhm.
before it was the innovative evangelist, and we flipped it. because they're not necessarily innovative about the way they evangelize. They're evangelizing their innovations.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. They're primarily coming up with new ideas, but they
And
love
getting people
to
excited about
evangelize.
those ideas.
Yeah.
That's a great point,
exactly.
Matt. That's another one that has new and a check mark next to it. I'm figuring this out. Okay, let's go to the IE. We don't know a lot of IEs, but it's not that rare, but somehow we haven't come across them. But the one we came across that we work with on a regular basis really fits it well. And we call the inventor and enabler person the adaptable designer, because they come up with new ideas, but darn it if they're not quick to go, oh, you don't like that one? You need something different? I'll tweak that for you.
Yep.
Mhm.
They're so great at customer service and new ideas,
Mhm.
which doesn't always go with the inventor. You know, sometimes we inventors can be kind of like wedded to our ideas, and these people are like, here's another idea. That doesn't work for us. That's fine. That's fine. I'll do another one for you,
Mm-hmm.
which is fabulous. It is just a fabulous thing. You know, the adaptable, it makes sense, you know, lots of new ideas, but not wedded to them and wants to really serve their customers. Now, sometimes they can be a little deferential as a result of that. Maybe they have a great idea and it's worth saying, wait a second, you guys. I know that's what you think you want, but this one is really the best one for you.
Mm-hmm.
They might struggle to do that sometimes.
Mhm.
And sometimes this is not always going to be the most proactive person, because they're like, I'll wait to know if they ask me for it, I'll do it. So they're reactive in their providing of service. So these folks would not call themselves the most like hard charging, I'm going to deliver this. You know, it's really a relationship that
Mhm.
they're doing. Does that make sense, Tracy?
Yeah, it does. Our designer is an IE, and I love working with IEs because I'm a D and I'm also an E. So I love, discerning his ideas, and then when I throw something back at him, he's so accommodating.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
His name's Grant. We should just say that. If you
Yes.
need a designer,
Yeah.
he's fantastic. Like, he's designing our book cover for the Working Genius book.
That's right.
And he is an absolute joy to work with, because if we go, yeah, this one doesn't look that well. We've worked with designers in the past. We're like, what? You're offending me.
That's
You
right.
didn't like my puzzle with 1,000 colors and shiny objects on it? And he's like, that's fine. Here, how about
Yep.
this one? So
Yep.
Grant is fantastic. Okay, next is the IT, which does not stand for technology. It's the invention and tenacity person. And we call this, and we have from the beginning, the methodical architect. Tracy, tell us about the methodical architect. What's good about them? Lots, by the way.
Gosh, they're very analytical. They work really hard. They've got great ideas and they know how to implement them.
Yep. Practical ideas,
They're
right?
very practical ideas. My son is in IT, love him to death, but super, super analytical. And that, of course, is also the downside. Sometimes they can be overly analytical.
Yeah. They're like, because they take something like, I designed this solution and here's how it should be implemented. And
Yeah.
life can be a little bit black and white, like, and this will work. And so they're pretty wedded to the way things get done.
That's right.
Probably nuance and flexibility this would not be the person at the top of that list.
Correct.
Yeah, Cody?
Right. And I didn't intend to do it this way, but I think it's interesting so we have the WI who has a bunch of ideas in a notebook. We have an IG who has a bunch of ideas that a lot of people know about, and you have an inventor tenacity person who has a lot of ideas that they already finished. And each one of those are kind of like, each one of those still needs inventors who have tenacity. A lot of times they'll get to the end of finishing it and realize maybe that needed refinement in advance. And
Yes.
the IGs are in the process of socializing the idea, and they're like, actually, we need to refine that before we get energy and momentum around it. And the WIs are like, so it's just interesting. Like, it's just a little bit of a nuance around what your genius are and what your second is that can totally change how you show up and what you contribute to a team.
Mhm.
And so an IT probably went from ideation to execution and probably has tried a bunch. And maybe they do a little bit of trial and error. And that's how they explore the workability of ideas. And
Mhm.
so they can come up with things and execute them. And they're really methodical about it.
Well, now, what I love about this whole model is we need each other. That's the
Mhm.
thing. And all three of those types need some discernment.
Mhm.
Yep.
The wonder is like, Here's my fifth idea. It's in a notebook. I'm going to take it to a discerner and find the 2 that I should actually start doing. The IG is like, I have this great idea and I'm telling people about it right now. Ooh, maybe I should stop for a second and go to a discerner and say, hey, is there something that I could do about this before I get people moving on something that might not be right? And the ITs would probably be slightly less likely to ask for more discernment just because they're so focused on moving forward and getting things done quickly.
Yep.
But we need each other. We need each other. All right, moving into the Ds, we got Cody's type, the DG.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, the discerning and galvanizing. So they have good judgment and they like to get people moving. We call them the intuitive activator. And this has been the same, and we've talked about this one on a podcast before, the intuitive activator. Lots of good things about them. Let's talk about Cody for a second.
How about I don't do that? How about you guys do it?
They have a good sense of what's a good idea really early in the process, and their gut is usually right. And so they're the ones that can go, hey, I don't think we need to spend more time on this. Let's get moving.
That's
and
right.
You feel good about it because you know they have good judgment. So they can really rally people, and in a way that you go, I can trust that if they're rallying me around it, this is probably a really good idea. Cody's the guy who, after we remember, because when he came back, he was out on, I'm not going to call it paternity leave. I mean, I guess it was that, but he was just helping. It wasn't like you have 8 weeks to be out. Anyway, the point is, Cody was out. They had a baby. He came back. He saw the working genius model, and he was the one he looked at it, listened, and said, "This is going to be bigger than anything we've ever done."
That's right.
And when he said that, we're like, well, if you're a DG and you're saying that, we're feeling pretty excited.
That's right.
Well, it's funny the way you describe that, Pat, because I do think the way it feels as a DG is if someone's giving 5 ideas or if we're in brainstorming mode, because I'm using discernment initially to evaluate the ideas, but when we zone in or like zero in on the right one, I want to start immediately getting to people rallied around it. So it can be very quick process of like, oh, okay, I'm almost like angsty if we can't get some momentum around it quickly, because that's where my galvanizing kicks in right away. So I don't love staying in the brain. I'm like pushing towards, okay, so what are we going to do? That's your best idea. How do we get it out there almost right away?
Exactly. And most of the time that is fantastic. And especially in the role you're in, you're squarely in the activator part of what we do. And that's what you do. You activate us. You're the chief galvanizing officer, the COO, the go-to-market guy. You're so important here, Cody, because of that very thing. So everybody's got a downside. Your type can sometimes be overly confident that you got it right.
Right.
Because you're quick to that.
I heard a pretty good phrase that I now use to describe myself. Stole it from one of our consultants. It was rarely wrong, but never in doubt. I am never in doubt. The galvanizer kicks in. I'm pretty confident about that. But that is definitely true, not just in my professional life, but in my personal life as well.
Yeah.
Right.
I think you're overly confident, and sometimes you can move too quickly because you're right next to one another. So you go from D to G so quickly. And it's, for someone like me, it's perceived as a little bit too fast. But more often than not, you're right.
Wouldn't it be terrible if somebody said, frequently wrong, but never in doubt? I don't think we have one of those up here, but when we get to it, we'll let you know. Okay. It brings us, he can move too fast. So we get to the DE, the discernment and enablement, the insightful collaborator. Now, our office, 3 of the 6 people that are sitting here in our office right now, outside here, are DEs. And I love every type. I do. And my wife's a WI. I love every type. But man, at work, for my type, I love DEs because we call them the insightful collaborator. And that means they'll come alongside and say, I want to help you. But before I do, I'm going to give you some thoughts about this thing that you want your help with to make sure it's actually what you need. And so this is like the person that comes along and won't help you right off a cliff. They'll help you avoid going off a cliff. But man, they're going to be right there doing everything you need. For me personally, it's like the lifesaver.
I totally agree. This is that word collaborator, and both words actually, they're spot on. This is one that I feel like our discernment really honed in on the exact words that that aren't likely to change ever. Because I think of Tracy as an insightful collaborator. Every initiative we have, just going to her and asking for her discernment, and then knowing that she's going to help move it along in the right way at the right time, and she's kind of anticipates people's needs. That word collaborator is just a really, really fantastic word that I think describes the DEs really well.
DEs get asked to help a lot because they're quick to say yes, and they'll go, yes, I will help you, but you need to know that this isn't, you don't want me to do this part because this would not be good for you. And you're like, oh, thank God that you're here to help and that you told me that. Now,
the dark side.
Yeah, the dark side, and it's a dark side. Ooh,
it's very dark.
Such a dark side. Is that sometimes they're double responsive, you know, and so they don't like to push really hard. If you have a great, and they'll be a little restrained sometimes about telling you something. They really want to, and they'll share it with you. But if a person is steamrolling them, they're not going to be like, it might be difficult for them to let them know. And as a result of that, because they don't push, sometimes they know something's not quite right, but they're not pushing back. So it might seem like they're being slow, but it's really because they don't think it's a great idea, but they don't necessarily tell you right away.
That's right.
And we're going to come up to a couple other types that will tell you right away.
Well, the thing that I think is also true is it's an interesting thing where an inventor might bring an idea to an insightful collaborator looking for their discernment. And then what ends up happening is their E also kicks in. So they almost take on every idea as like I need to help. Like first I help them refine it, but now I feel obligated to help it get off the ground a little bit. And so I see you do that, Tracy, like, you have to be really careful about bringing you something because you're going to be like, is this now mine? I own this now, and we have to be really clear about that.
And that's where it gets into the other types too, because Tracy has T.
That's right. That's my third.
Yeah. So she's like, oh, I better finish this. It's not my genius, but I don't like things unfinished. So Tracy in particular, because of that, can get really, like we always say, Tracy will work until she gets sick.
Yep.
Because it's not easy for her to go, I think I'm a week away from being sick, you guys. This isn't going to get finished. Because she's going to finish it.
Yep.
But we're working on that though, right, Trace?
Yes, we are.
Very good.
All right.
Okay, by the way, I mentioned paternity leave before. I think paternity leave is great. I think guys should stay home with their wives and their children when they have a baby. So I wasn't criticizing that. We just don't call it that. And it feels like, oh, it's a new thing. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure. Cody?
I think you're in the clear, Pat. No
good.
worries.
The next 4 babies you guys have, you should stay home and help out a lot. Okay. All right. So next one is the DT. Speaking of helping home your wife who's going to have a baby, she's a DT. So this is discernment. So they have good judgment and tenacity, and they like to get crap done.
Yep.
Okay. So we call them the judicious accomplisher because it's not just about getting stuff done. It's about getting the right things done and having really good sense about what that is. This is such a valuable, they all are, but like, it's such an interesting combo, because you need both of those things. And DTs, Julie on our team is one of those. A lot of people listening know, man, they are very productive.
Yeah,
they are very productive. Of course, they need other types with them to help them. But there's something about them going, I think this is a good decision. Okay, I'm all in. We're going to crank.
Yeah. And I think you're right, Pat. They have one foot in the activation part of work as a discerner, and then one foot in the very last stage of work, the tenacity piece, which is implementation. And so they do play a really critical role in like catching things, ideas, evaluating them, and then executing on them. And I think one thing that we've noticed is it's important. The T, tenacity, tends to have a lot of weight when it's one of your geniuses, almost as if people can go to T before almost any other genius. And so it's important for DTs to use the D first and then follow behind with the tenacity piece. I think there is a reason that these are in order. And I would say that of any type, it's important for me to use my discernment before my galvanizing, because otherwise I'd be galvanizing maybe things that weren't fully vetted. And so it is interesting if you can be disciplined enough to use it in that order. I think it's more helpful.
I think that's a great point. T is so observable that we tend to go to the most observable things first. That's interesting. Now, what's the downside of a DT? There's an angst in them because they're like, judging something and want to get it done. And so they can be like, oh, I'm afraid we're not going to get it done. So most of the DTs we know would say they have an angst about them in getting things done. Now, and this is something they've said to us. We call it the judicious accomplisher. Judicious is a great word, but they will say, I'm kind of a judgmental accomplisher too, is when somebody's lazy or when they're doing something that's not very competent, they can get pretty frustrated at them.
Yeah.
Now, they might not actually express it, but the DTs will tell you, and you can kind of pick up on it, that deep down inside, they have this sense of disapproval that can be a little tough.
They also are like frustrated by inefficiency, because the D part is like kind of like, oh, hey, we can get that done a little easier, and so they can be a little frustrated by that.
Which of course is a wonderful thing.
Right.
But even they will say it, but then I get angsted when I'm around people and they're doing that and I don't know what to do. The DT. We're going to go to the GE. That's the galvanizing and enabling. We call this the enthusiastic encourager. Now, both of those seem like they kind of go together, but they do. This is one of those double whammies. Like, they like to encourage people to act and they're enthusiastic about it. The EG. And these are some of the most positive, affirming, life-giving people there are. Someday in the next year or so, we're going to go through and look at what kind of jobs these people have when they're happy, because we want them to have the right jobs. But you can think of these people, if you're in a role where your job is to keep things moving and keep people feeling good about it and tell them what they're doing a great job of, you can see this in a lot of different professions, but especially if you're working I can think of if you were I think a camp counselor would be great at this for this. Now, their fundraisers might be really good at this. Relationship matters, keeping things moving happens. I mean, a CEO could be great at this too.
Right.
Any kind of job, but if it's encouraging people and having a lot of energy, GEs are really valuable.
Yeah, that E kicks in, especially when it's related to helping others. They're like, boy, I want to help. And then they can rally a lot of people to support the cause. I think of Sophia in our office, who did a whole toy drive that blew up and got on the news because she's so dedicated to helping people in the hospital, that these kids that could benefit from these toys, and then went around and rallied a bunch of businesses and hospitals and other people to help out. And what a wonderful gift that is to a team, and to other team members.
Absolutely. Now, the side of the EG or GE that can be not as helpful is they can sometimes affirm too much. There are times when they're affirming people and you're like, I think that person might need some correction, or I think that's probably not something. And they're like, yeah, but my encouragement is going crazy and I love it. And so sometimes they can do that. And when they do that too much, then their encouragement can sometimes lose a little bit of its value, because people are like, oh, you just do that reflexively. So the one thing about GEs, they need to make sure that they're being super intentional about what they're doing. But boy, they love to galvanize and encourage, and they're enthusiastic about that. Make sense?
Makes sense.
All righty. The GT. All right. The GT. We know a lot of GTs. I love doing this type. This is a double disruptive. They're the galvanizer and tenacious. They're called the assertive driver. Now, most people that have this type would say, you should just call me the butt kicker and get right to it. Because they are the people who, come on, everybody, we got to keep moving and we got to get it done. And I love me having GTs around, because they cut through things and make things move. I also love that I don't have to do that. Because that's not my gift. So many organizations will really benefit from having a GT on the team that will just cut right through the BS and say, this is what we need to do. No excuses. A lot of probably GTs would say that too.
And I think it's interesting if you think about the type of things that gives a galvanizer and tenacity person joy and energy. A galvanizer is rallying people around something. And then a tenacity person is someone who gets joy and energy by finishing things. So this is that double disruptive. They can get hordes of momentum in a direction to get something done. And think of it like, you kind of use your galvanizing as a way of getting other people to do it. And then they can also go actually, I'm in the trenches too, getting this done. And it can feel not only disruptive, it can feel very impatient and fast sometimes. That drive to get to accomplish can feel really swift and really like spurts.
Yeah, a GT would probably be very frustrated in an environment where you had to be super deferential. And like, there's a lot of churches need GTs because churches are often way too nice instead of just kind. But if you're a GT and you're working in one of those super nice churches and you see somebody not getting their work done, you're like, am I allowed to tell them that they're being lazy or that that's a stupid way to do this? Because if not, now that doesn't mean they're always rude about it, because they're not. But if there's a dark side to GTs, they can bulldoze a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And a GT probably can hear that and go, you bet your butt I can. So again, this feedback is from people that have all these different types. So it's really fun to be able to say that, because the GTs we know will go, I don't mind being a bulldozer.
Yeah.
You know, I can be tough.
Yeah,
So-
Pat, I remember when we hired Jackie in our office.
Yeah.
Jackie's a GT. And Jackie would just sit and rally us. She would sit in the middle of the room and she'd clap her hands and she'd say, come on, people, let's do this.
Yeah.
That was her motto.
The beauty was, and then she'd roll up her sleeves and do it with us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I love that. We got to make her a shirt that says, come on, people, let's do this. You know, we should probably make a shirt for every one of these types with like their theme, like the
There's
quote.
your eye. Yes.
You know,
Yeah, the quote. That'd be great. So
All
Matt,
right.
mine would say pushy douchebag on it. I don't think I can wear a shirt that says pushy douchebag on it, but we'll see.
okay, we're on our last one, the ET, phone home. People, if you're old, you know what that means. ET, they like enablement and tenacity. These are immensely employable people because they like helpful and they get things done. We call them the loyal finisher. This is a new term for us, the loyal finisher.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, are they reliable, responsive to the needs, high standards, don't have to be managed hard to keep going.
Yep.
We love us some ETs. We don't have an ET in our company.
No, but Tracy's familiar with an
We
ET,
do have-
right?
We have Carol, our accountant.
Oh, our
is an
finance
ET.
person.
Our finance person is an ET, and my husband is an ET,
Yeah,
which is so wonderful.
And Carol walks in the office once a week because she's here on staff once a week. She is always so cheerful.
You just want to hug her.
You do. And she will kick your butt to get things done in the kindest way.
Yes.
Remember, we have to do this and we have to have it by 5. And I'm going to keep telling you. And it's wonderful. She's the loyal finisher. And your husband, Greg, is too.
Yes.
And I know a lot of loyal finishers, and they are so valuable in organizations. And we love them. We want to love on these people. You know what? One of the downsides of a loyal finisher, and this is true about Greg, your husband, and about Carol, is they oversubscribe. They over volunteer.
Yes.
And as a result of that's one thing to over volunteer, but because they can't let things go, they have to finish them. They can get really overcommitted and overwhelmed. And as a result of that, ETs can get taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
You know, go to a parent event and where they say you have to volunteer for this activity, the parent who raises their hand right away and they've got 9 kids and there's no reason that they should be volunteering, but they will and they'll get it done. But then you're like looking at them going, are you okay?
What are you doing?
Yeah. They don't have even time to talk about if they're okay because they have another thing they've already volunteered for. So like Greg can really oversubscribe to things. Is that right?
Yes. And then once he's in, he's in. That loyalty is so strong in him. So it does become overwhelming at times.
And when you have people, an ET in your organization, just know they might quit or get really sick before they tell you that they have too much on their plate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that even the language you use, because we've talked about how enablement tends to be a little more oriented to the people and wanting to serve the person or the human side. And then tenacity is a little more around the task and wanting to finish. And when you put both together, they have this extreme loyalty to the person themselves. Like, oh, somebody asked for help or needed help. I want to help them to alleviate the pain they're experiencing. And then they can't help but finish the actual task. So I think it's totally understandable, especially if they're in an environment where people need a lot of help, that they would sign themselves up and then not give up before the job is done.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I just realized something thinking about Carol and Greg and my dad, God rest his soul, who was an ET. They'll do things in a very low maintenance way too.
Mhm.
it's easy to not give them the praise and the appreciation that they deserve.
That's so true.
Because you kind of just go, well, that's just who they are. But and it hurts them, but they don't want to tell you that. They'll be the last to tell you that. But these people, find them in your organization and shower them with praise and appreciation, because and every type needs that for their type. But these people will burn out.
Mhm.
And we sometimes forget. They don't seem to need it, but they really do appreciate it.
Mhm.
All righty. So that brings us to the end. This was a long one, but a good one.
Yeah.
And let's remind you, the 6 types themselves, WIDGET, that's the important part of this. 2 geniuses, we all have them. These descriptions, these labels, and the stuff on the other side, the dark side, if you will, are there to be helpful in confirming your type or remembering it, but we do not want it to overwhelm the purity of what this model is really all about. And certainly we don't want to weaponize any of these things.
Mhm.
All righty. So that's it today. We'll wrap it up right there. Thank you for listening. We hear from so many listeners. We meet them all the time, and we honor that, and we try to do a great job on these podcasts for you. And we love that you're sharing Working Genius with the world. So thanks for being on. God bless you all, and we'll talk to you next time on the Working Genius Podcast.